Also, what a chore it is to get to you. Because I took a little tumble in the Belgrade airport, fell down the steps and sprained my ankle. But however, I had a wonderful, wonderful Serbian healthcare experience, entirely in Serbian, so that was interesting, but it was great. Fixed me up. It was awesome. So I made it. I made it. So here we are. Thank you all for coming to Heapcon 2025. This is my second time here, and it's wonderful. I love this event. As Miriam said, my name is Jeremy Wagner, and I'm a senior technical writer for the Chrome Developer Relations team, working on content and content strategy for Baseline, which I will tell you all about here in a minute. So hopefully this event has been super informative for you as developers working on the web, and I hope that this session only helps teach you even more about what we at Google and Chrome are working on to make your developer experience even better. And so this session is about Baseline and how to use it in your day-to-day developer workflow. So maybe you've heard about Baseline, but it's probable that you haven't. As a show of hands, I'm just kind of curious. Who here has heard of Baseline? Okay, we got a couple here, but we're going to need to have a quick go over here. So let's take a second to go over this. So Baseline is a project that was initiated by Chrome, but it is currently owned by the web.dev community, the community group through the W3C. Its goal is to provide clear and consistent messaging on what browser features have or haven't landed in the core browser set. So Baseline defines the core browser set as Chrome for desktop and Android, Edge, Firefox for desktop and Android, and Safari for macOS and iOS. And Baseline offers 3 thresholds to help developers understand the level of compatibility of a given feature across the core browsers. The first is limited availability, and this threshold indicates that a feature is not available in all of the core browsers. It may well be available in 1 or 2 of the core browsers, but until it's available in all of them, the feature's compatibility remains as limited availability. This means these are features that you might polyfill or do like feature checking for, that kind of thing, or just not use them altogether, depending on what your threshold is. The next is Baseline newly available, and this indicates that the feature has landed in all of the core browsers, likely quite recently. And then the next, the third threshold, is Baseline widely available. And this designation is given to web features that have been newly available for 30 months, so 2.5 years. So the first threshold is the easiest to understand. If something has limited availability, it's not available to use across the core browsers. However, why are there 2 designations for features that are usable in all browsers? Why is the distinction for both Baseline newly and widely available so important? Well, it helps to think of the moments between when a feature becomes newly available and widely available as a spectrum when it comes to support in the browsers in use, or that your users use. So when a feature first becomes Baseline newly available, you might not be able to use it immediately. You can't assume that all of your users will support that feature, as it takes time for browsers to update themselves. However, as time passes, and browsers update, support grows for that feature across users of the web. And after 30 months, support should be nearly universal, if not universal, except in cases where browsers can't be updated or systems still on legacy browsers, which tend to be a vast minority of all users. But of course, there are some exceptions. So what Baseline doesn't do, now that you know that Baseline provides clarity around messaging for web platform features, here's a couple things that you should know that Baseline does not do. Baseline doesn't tell you which features you should or shouldn't use today, even if they are limited availability. Baseline doesn't tell you whether you should use polyfills for limited availability features. In fact, polyfills are not a part of Baseline's evaluation criteria, only if a feature is natively implemented in a browser or not. Baseline also doesn't tell you whether you should consider progressive enhancement for limited availability features. This is a decision that's unique to your web application's need and the feature itself, and how easy it is to progressively enhance it or enhance for it. So what you can take away from this is that Baseline's mission is to inform developers about interoperable features and encourage developers to use them if it makes sense for them to do so. So now that you have a sense of what baseline does and doesn't do, let's dive into a little bit of code. So in this session, you'll see a basic sample app built in React that uses a variety of features. Some are baseline newly available, some widely available, and some are limited availability. In this session, we'll explore how you could add a browsers list-based workflow, browsers list, which if you do web development is a common tool for targeting browsers in the environments that you want to support. We will explore how you can use browsers list in your project in order to use baseline to help you target which browsers you want to support by the features they support. So in this case, so let's see here, it's go time. All right, can everybody see that? Is that good? Should I bump up the font size? We good to go? Up? Okay, I'm seeing it in the back there. Let's try that. So we got a bunch of stuff here. And plus, this setup's a little weird, so I got to get kind of used to it for a second. Okay, so this is the root of our project. The project uses React and Webpack. So there's like a Webpack-based workflow here. Whether or not you use Webpack, if you have a bundler that uses browsers list in any way, or any tooling that uses browsers list, really the important thing is to know is that it's a browsers list set of queries that you can use, so regardless of what bundler you're using. But I've messed around with Webpack, so that's what it is. So to get an idea of the app, let's go ahead and launch the development server, or really just start the thing, and open the local instance. So you see there's a bunch of stuff. We're building, and then we've got that up. And so, let's see here, localhost. Okay, so this is a simple app. It's just a single page of an image gallery of space telescope imagery from the James Webb Telescope that launched fairly recently. And as you type type into the input field at the top, the React app filters the cards according to your search terms. It's a very basic app, but it does use a mix of features. Some are baseline newly available, such as lazy loading of images through the loading attribute in HTML, fetch priority, the OKLab color space, subgrid, like CSS subgrid. Many other features in the app are baseline widely available features that have been around for a very long time. And there might even be a limited availability feature or two. Actually, I can't recall because I built this a while ago, and some of those features might actually be newly available now. So let's go back to the terminal. It's important to note that the app itself isn't the main focus here. It's really the tool chain we care about, and how you can select what we call a baseline target that your tool chain will understand and generate production code for. So if you write code for a living, there's a good chance that you're familiar with tooling like bundlers. And if you've ever configured a bundler, you may have heard about something, as I brought it up, browsers list. You may have heard about browsers list. And this is a browser querying syntax that you can drop into your projects to specify exact browser versions you want to support, like Chrome 109, or even relative sorts of queries like last two versions. With this info, bundlers and the underlying tooling will tailor the output of production code according to the capabilities of the browsers that match the browsers list query. And this can affect things like polyfills too. Out of the box, Vite compiles code for modern browsers, but for some, not Vite, Webpack in this case. I was using Vite on another version of this talk, so it's kind of come a ways. Out of the box, Webpack compiles code for modern browsers, but for some projects, you might need to tweak how code is generated, including transforms and polyfills. So in this project, this is done with Core.js and Babel, tools that if you're a web developer who's push production code who's push production code, you're probably pretty familiar, or at least have heard of Core.js and Babel. And what is polyfilled can change based on the browser's list query. So let's look at the Babel config for a second and just get a sense of how this is configured. So I'm going to bump this up because this is already a little small. I don't want to risk going any larger. It might cut some stuff off. Okay, so this is the project's Babel config. And all it uses, for the most part, is just the Babel preset env preset and the preset React preset, because it's a React app, so you got to transform JSX. Here we have configured it to do a few important things. Modules is set to false, so that ES modules from our source code are preserved. Use built-ins is set to usage, which tells Babel to inject polyfills from Core.js automatically. And in the next option, we set the core.js version explicitly. And speaking of polyfills, let's see if I can get around this. This might look a little unprofessional here. Yep, it's going to look a little goofy, but that's okay. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of polyfilling using a browser's list config, I think it's important to reiterate that Baseline's messaging does not tell you what to do when it comes to polyfilling. That's a decision for you to make. And the article on web.dev that I wrote a little while ago is a bit of what I like to call baseline theory, like how to think about baseline, which gives you a bit of a mental framework for making these decisions. And a big part of the decision-making progress does depend on some factors, such as if universal browser support for a feature is important to you or not, and how that aligns with how many of your users currently support baseline features. So, this means you have to select what's known as a baseline target. And features that become baseline newly available are grouped in yearly sets, such as 2025, 2024, 2023, and so on. These are some of the baseline targets that you can select all the way back to 2015, I believe, 2016 for certain. And these are fixed targets, but there are two moving targets. And these are baseline newly available and baseline widely available. And you might be tempted to think that because a feature becomes newly available, it's broadly compatible across the entire user base. And that's sort of true. A significant majority of users will support a recently emerging newly available feature, but a sizable minority that doesn't will also still exist. And this is because it does take time for those browsers to update themselves, and if they can, depending on the age of a device or environment. So what you'll tend to find is that over time, feature support amongst a given set of users will increase over time until it becomes widely available. And widely available is a great default to work with if you don't want to select one of those fixed targets. And in fact, widely available is probably your best bet in most cases. And the nice thing about it is, as time goes on, your targets will shift because newly available and widely available are about the point in time that a specific feature has become baseline. And so with widely available, what you're saying is as time goes on, that 30-month window, that 2.5-year window is going to shift with you as your project develops, meaning you don't even have to think about revisiting your browser's list query as time goes on. You can set to or widely available in that case, and it will update itself. There's a better way to put it, I'm sure, but I'm a little bit low on words. Or a lot of words that don't really say anything, but we'll see. So how you choose a baseline target depends. So do you have real user data? Have you heard of RUM, for example, RUM data? Like normally, real user data is a pretty common thing when it comes to aspects of your user base, commonly used for things like performance metrics. But when it comes to baseline, it's still a developing space, although it's maturing fairly rapidly. Right now, there is a provider, RumVision, which this is a screenshot of, and it's hard to see, I know, so I'm going to have to kind of narrate it a bit. RumVision currently offers a way to measure support for features across your website's users. And that support is also broken down by baseline targets, giving you a sense of what baseline target you can select based on how many users would support it. So this tool, which is hard to see here, sorry about that. Different screens sometimes give you a bit of a better deal. But in this case, what we see is that there are different baseline targets that are in a list, and there are also a list of features. And in this tool, in this product, it will tell you 99% of users support intl.duration format, if you're way into internationalization or something like that. So these tools are really helpful. However, in the absence of this, like let's say you just can't afford or don't want to have to afford a enterprise tool, you can always fall back, like I said, to baseline widely available as a default. You could look at RUM archive data to see what target is globally tracked for like users that have the best support. And so if you use Google Analytics, though, let's say, okay, well, I do have Google Analytics. I do have some user data. How can I translate this into baseline target support? You can get this information for free by exporting a custom report from your analytics account as a TSV file with this tool called Google Analytics Baseline Checker. This tool, and once you import into this tool, you'll find that what it gives you is you'll see support for each baseline feature or for each baseline target rather, across your website's real users, giving you a really quick idea of what feature sets are the safest for you to use. And this tool also only processes the data on your device. So your analytics data is never uploaded anywhere. Although we're Google, so we already have your Google Analytics data. So yeah, I thought it was kind of funny when I talked with the engineer about like, oh, it does this on device. You know, we already have their data, right? Like, I get the whole privacy thing, but we already have it. We know everything about you. Sorry. Okay, back to the code. Well, actually, I wanted to kind of go over this for a second. So you can see here, for people who might not be able to see this, what you see is a table with the baseline target on the left, 2015, 2016, all the way up to the current year, or current year -1, and then widely and newly available. And on the right-hand side, we have % of users that support that target. And what you'll see is you're getting near universal support until you get to about 2023 in this case. And this was for, I think, for web.dev, our website. So once you get to 2023, that target has 95%. 2024 starts to have 90%. So you start getting a little bit dicier. Widely available is 98%. And so really what remains here is for you to select what makes the most sense. You might be tempted to just go with 100%. That's great. It's great if you want to do that. But most of the time, unless you're running like something with an application with like really high SLA requirements, you can use like ecom or something like that. You could get away with a more recent target and address bugs as users give you that information. So let's see what this looks like when you're putting it into action. So let's connect the idea of baseline back to the idea of baseline back to a browser's list config. And in this project, we use Babel automatically to inject polyfills through the core.js package, and that is influenced by a browser's list query. However, if your browser's list query is sort of broad, like it can include browsers that you didn't expect. For example, I've seen a lot of different queries in projects, and they do vary. Sometimes they just use the default query, which isn't horrible, and this is what this project defaults to currently. But there are some queries that you can specify, like last 2 versions, which includes legacy browsers you might not have expected, like Internet Explorer 10 is part of the last 2 versions. Some of the code you write may be transformed in some way, and more polyfills than you need might end up being injected, which is sort of the downfall of not really thinking about your browser's list query, and how baseline makes this a lot simpler. So this project currently uses, I believe, nope, it doesn't. It uses, I already spoiled it for you. I already spoiled it. Let's assume that this project uses the defaults target real quick here. So we get an app output of the app bundle of about 209 kilobytes with the defaults query. Now, a good chunk of that is the framework and the functionality that it needs to work. Some of it is the application code. It does compress down, but it's a big bundle for what amounts to a simple app. And that can cause performance issues like long tasks that can affect INP, which I talked about last year. Another thing that is impacted, though, to a much lesser extent, is the size of a project's CSS, as this project uses auto prefixer, which is also affected by browser's list. With some tweaks to this project, things can get a little bit more on the smaller side, but it's also important to note that the thing to pay attention to here is not so much the output size of the code. That is important for performance, but rather how the browser's list query changes based on what we specify, and how selecting a baseline target affects that. Right now, this project currently is not using a baseline query. By setting a browser's list query that aligns with a baseline target, we can reliably target a specific set of browsers that support the features we'd want to use. But that's a complicated process. How does one go about translating a concept such as baseline widely available to a browser's list query? It's complex in part because it's a moving target. It changes frequently because widely available features reference features that were newly available for over 30 months. It's a relative amount of time. It's not a fixed amount of time. Thankfully, you don't need to make this sort of calculation yourself because there is a tool that does it for you, which is a package. Actually, it used to be a package called Browsers List Config Baseline, but we don't have to use that anymore because we have worked with the Browsers List team, and now we have baseline queries natively available in Browsers List. So, as I've said, a baseline target can reference a fixed year containing a set of features that became newly available, or it can be set to widely available. I've also said you've needed data for this, and if you don't have data, widely available is a good default. So let's go ahead and look at our browser's list config here real quick. But one thing I do want to do, and this is important, is to set the debug flag on our Babel config for preset env. And the reason we want to do this is it helps us to see what Babel is up to. And when we see what Babel is up to, preset env at least, it will tell us what polyfills are getting injected. It will also show us how our browser's list query is being translated to a discrete set of targeted browsers. And I can show you what this looks like in action real quick. So if I do this again, npm run build. So it's going to do its thing. OK. Right here, this is what the default query gives us. And we can see Android 139, Chrome 109, Edge 128, Firefox 128, iOS. So that default query ends up being translated into something like this. So while this might look a little simple at first blush, it's actually a little bit complicated under the hood. But that's complication you don't really have to think about too much. So let's play around with some of these a little bit and just get a sense of what this looks like. Now, baseline widely available is a pretty good target. So let's go ahead and try this. So the default, like the built-in browser's list queries for baseline are pretty simple. You could just say baseline widely available. You could also say baseline newly available or baseline 2016 in this. And this does get translated into a nice little list here. So hang on. So let's take a look. We're at baseline widely available. Now you'll notice that our application code is roughly about the same size. Again, we're not really thinking too much about the application code so much. We're thinking about how the targets change. And now you can see here that our targets have changed. And I'll bump this up a little bit. So now for widely available, we're at Chrome 111, Edge 111, Firefox 112, et cetera, Safari 16.4. And what's nice about this is that by just saying baseline widely available, this is what it gets translated into. Because imagine how difficult that is. Like, oh, what version of Chrome was out 30 months ago? And you have to do this over and over again. And now you don't have to. And that's really cool. Now, we could, like, let's say you're running like a government website and the SLAs are extremely high, right? So let's go back into our browser's list config in package.json. We can target a specific year by just saying, I believe, let's hope I get this right, by just saying baseline 2016. That could be wrong. If that's the case, then maybe I'll have to mess around a little bit. Yes, OK, it worked. So you'll notice one thing right here, which is a little hard to see. Because we've selected a much older target, like an older fixed target, we do end up seeing that the bundle, the main bundle, is roughly 20-ish kilobytes larger. But our browser's list query also changes too. And that's important to note. And also the amount of polyfills that get injected. So you can see here on the targets where it says Chrome 53, Edge 14, we're targeting so far back that we're pre-Chromium Edge in this case. So, but it works this way, and if you do have like a project or an app that has these extremely high SLAs where you have to cover nearly every user, if not every user, these targets are available for you to use. Another thing to think about, or another thing to notice at least, is what Core.js is doing. And what you can see here is that the Core.js 3 polyfill is adding all of these polyfills based on the browsers that don't support them, right? So for example, you're seeing things like array.includes, so you don't have to use index of. That has to get polyfilled in this case for Firefox 49. String.includes has to get polyfilled because it wasn't available in Edge 14. What does this look like if we decide to change our polyfills again? Let's do a really recent one. Let's say we're like bleeding edge, baseline 2024, like super duper bleeding edge. What does our output look like if we decide to adopt that? So if we run the build, well, right off the bat, our main bundle is back down to about 208 kilobytes because we don't have to polyfill as much. And you can see that our browser targets, Chrome 130, Edge 130, these are fairly recent. They were last year. And then you'll also notice that our polyfills, it says the core.js polyfill added the following polyfills. Now we're only adding polyfills for things that aren't available in 2024. So iterator methods here. So iterator.filter.map. It's distinct from array.map and array.filter because this is on the iterator interface itself and not on the array interface, and that is a newly available feature. And I actually wrote an article about it. That's on web.dev, but that's besides the point. So calls like this, when it comes to baseline, can be more easily made when you have tooling that give you hints as to whether the features you're using are broadly supported or not. And the first of these tools is ESLint. And it's a popular linter, which now supports CSS and HTML. And as a part of CSS lint support in ESLint, you can get warnings or errors generated based on your ESLint config. So let's take a look at that real quick. Bop. OK. So to configure ESLint to lint CSS, you have to install a separate package at ESLint/CSS. There's also an ESLint HTML plugin that's a community plugin. It's not officially from ESLint, HTML-ESLint, but works very similar to the CSS linter. In this example, I've configured ESLint to throw warnings for features that are not widely available. And you might have spied that output during the build process, but let's go back and run just the linter for a second. So if I do npm run lint, OK. So here you can see that we get some warnings about CSS features that are outside of the baseline target that we've set. In particular, this project uses subgrid, which is an extension to CSS grid layout that allows child elements within a grid to align with tracks on a parent grid. And this feature became baseline newly available in 2023. So it's not quite widely available yet, but it should be widely available within the next 6 months, I believe. So while this configuration I've shown you throws warnings, you can configure ESLint to throw errors if particular features, CSS or HTML features you use in your project, don't meet a specific baseline target. It's a great way to help you know what features are safe or safer to use. And you can try it right in your development workflow. And for example, you might want to throw errors in cases like if you have strict project requirements, like, again, government app, high SLAs, you might want your app to throw an error when it lints and prevent building from happening if a feature is being used that shouldn't be used because it's not broadly compatible enough. And good news, if you prefer to use style lint for CSS linting, that also has its own baseline integration. I won't show it here because I have ESLint installed. But if you search for style lint baseline, you should be able to find this. So if we go here, bonus, wait for it. If you've configured the ESLint extension in VS Code, you can also see that these warnings pop right up in your editor. If it will get there. No, my linter's broken. Great. VS Code updated itself recently, and we had a problem. However, if it is working, if you have a working ESLint installation, unlike some people who work at Google who really should but don't have it working right now, you would see right here on line 81 that you would get a yellow squiggly underneath this subgrid property value because it would not be considered baseline widely available, or a red squiggly if it's an error. And additionally, we're starting to see, as you can tell, some baseline information has already landed in VS Code itself. So for example, in this style sheet, I can quickly figure out which features, CSS features, are widely or newly available by hovering over them. So if I hover over the CSS property for, say, like the property, not the value, for, say, grid template rows, we can see that this is widely available since 2017 because that is when the CSS grid implementation landed in all browsers. It's a really neat way in your developer experience to get a quick glance at the browser support for stuff you want to use in your projects. And it works when you hover over HTML elements as well. If I go here, I can hover over the link element, and it will tell you the link element works. Currently, I believe support is being worked on to get more granular. So like you could hover over things like the rel pre-connect value and get like a card that would tell you like when pre-connect was implemented and that kind of thing. OK, so if you want to play with the code in this demo, we do have a demo code repository, although this is for the Vite version of it. Oh, sorry.
It's not visible.
It's not visible? Sorry. Yeah, just tap slideshow, sorry. Woo, okay, sorry about that. You can play with the code on the Veet version. We do have a baseline demos repository as well that I can hook you up with because it was fairly recently rolled out. But if you want to play with this code and see what it looks like, check out that QR code. And with that, we have reached the end of this talk. Sorry, it was a little bit of a bumpy ride in spots. You know, every place has got its own little things you got to think about. Hopefully, you did find this informative, and that baseline can help you to adopt newer and more broadly compatible features faster and with more confidence. And so we don't have a lot of time left. In fact, about a minute. So in lieu of taking, I don't know if we do Q&A. I remember I did Q&A on stage last year. Do we want to do any Q&A? Do we? Okay, cool. We got time for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, I can do my best to answer them here. If not, if you can't get your question in, I'm around in the hall. You'll find me, just bug me. So, any questions? Anyone out there?
Can you raise your left arm? Yes, he will be very easy to identify if you have questions.
If you like The Lord of the Rings, I have a treat for you. This is a love letter to my favorite fantasy novel. Any questions? I can't see very well, so. Wow.
Wait. Don't move.
Oh.
We have a question.
Whoa, okay.
The gentleman has a mustache, is on the right.
I thought I explained baseline so incredibly well that nobody would have a question, but clearly that wasn't the case.
Oh, yeah?
Can't hear you.
You can hear me, right?
Now I can.
Ah,
yep.
Cool. So, in lieu of what you said, this may sound stupid then, but is baseline an extension or something that you just put in the Babel config, like a browser list or something? I just want to get that sweet
Sure.
pop-up.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing. So it's a tough thing because baseline itself is more. It's not a discrete tool. It's a framework for evaluating browser support, right? But we have surfaced it in tooling. So in the case of browsers list, it's not an extension. It's not like a browsers list. You know, you've had like custom browsers list configs possibly where it's like, oh, I have say my name is Dave browsers list config or whatever, right? Yeah. We used to do that with baseline, but now you don't even have to install an extension for this to work. Browsers list supports this natively now. So. Okay. You might have to update your NPM packages because I found when I tried to run it on this, I was still using the old package and it did not recognize baseline widely available. I updated, it recognized it. Try it out. If it doesn't work with baseline or with browsers list natively, update your packages and try it again and it should work.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's built in. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay, so a second small question is when you put defaults in the browsers list, I saw Opera there. And then when you put like widely or newly or any year, yep. Opera was gone. So what's up with that?
So I was thinking about this as I was talking. And I thought, do I want to do this or am I just going to get really distracted? So I'm glad you asked this. We call those browsers downstream browsers because Opera, Brave, browsers like that, most of the downstream browsers are Chromium anyway. If you do need, or Samsung Internet, if you do need to target these specifically, you can add to any baseline query. In fact, I'll demonstrate it right now. You can add the words with downstream to any query you want. So let's go ahead and do this because I think it'd be worth it. Because this is important, especially in many parts of the world, downstream browsers tend to be used more frequently or more widely than they do in the US. So if I do, say, baseline widely available with downstream, and I build again, what should happen is you should start to see, yep. So you can see Opera Mobile, Safari, or not Safari, that's a core browser, and Samsung Internet. So yes, you can target those browsers. Just add with downstream to any valid baseline query and it gets you that. So, awesome. Does anybody else have any questions? I can't see very well. You might have to yell.
Sadly, we're out of time.
We're out of time.
We'll have to find you. So. You do not get a 10-minute break here, you get a 7-minute break, but I invite you to come back on time for the next talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.